Hello, everyone. My name is Olivia Mattis, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Sousa Mendes Foundation. We've been running these programs for the past year on beautiful stories of rescue and resistance. And every once in a while, we love to bring the story back to our own hero, Aristides de Sousa Mendes, whom we honor at the Sousa Mendes Foundation. Today, we have a moderator, Robert Jacobvitz, who's my dear friend and colleague. So Robert, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Olivia. And as Olivia has introduced me, I'm a member of the board. I serve as the board secretary, amongst other responsibilities I have with the organization. As we were developing today's program, the foundation was informed that this past April, the U.S. Senate passed Resolution 186, which passed co-sponsored by Senators Romney of Utah and Chris Murphy of Connecticut. The effort toward the resolution was advanced by Mr. Martin Gold, a member of the U.S. Commission for the Preservation of America's Heritage Abroad. Its full title is Honoring the Humanitarian Work of Dr. Aristides de Sousa Mendes do Amaral e Abranches to save the lives of French Jews and other persons during the Holocaust. We thank Mr. Gold for his initiative, and I'm pleased to share with you the following pre-recorded statement by Senator Romney on the occasion of today's program.
We must never forget the victims and the survivors of the Holocaust. And that includes honoring those brave individuals who put their lives on the line to save Jews and others whose lives were at risk from Nazi occupiers. Recently, Senator Chris Murphy and I sponsored a resolution that the Senate passed unanimously to honor Dr. Aristides de Sousa Mendes for issuing tens of thousands of visas for people to leave France for Portugal in 1940, saving thousands of lives. Remembering not just the horrors of that era, but the courageous acts of our heroes, Sousa Mendes, among those like him, can inspire us to reach for the ideals of those who came before us.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Romney. We have three very special guests with us today. First person I will be in discussion with is former Representative Tony Coelho, and then following will be two granddaughters of Aristides de Sousa Mendes, granddaughter Gigi Muetzel, as well as granddaughter SHEILA Pierce. And we'll hear more about their names as they are in discussion with me. The Honorable Tony Coelho served 6 terms as a congressman whose district covered much of the California San Joaquin Valley, better known as the Central Valley, being the first Portuguese American elected to Congress and the first Portuguese American to have the leadership position as majority whip, and that is the Democratic majority whip in Congress, in the House. Along with other legislative victories, he is most proud of his sponsoring and the passage of the American with Disabilities Act of 1990. To this day, he continues to fight for the rights of those with disabilities, with himself having epilepsy, and just recently established within La Jolla Marymount University Law School, of which he is a proud alumni, the Coelho Center for Disability Law, Policy, and Innovation. We at the Sousa Mendes Foundation regard him as our hero for his bringing to the elected and diplomatic leadership of Portugal the resulting positive resolution to the disgraceful manner of previous regimes' unwillingness to recognize Aristides de Sousa Mendes disobeying immoral orders by issuing visas to innocent individuals and families escaping Nazi advancement in France during World War II, when stationed as Consul General in Bordeaux. It is again my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce you to former Congressman Coelho, who will be in conversation with me. Thank you. So, Congressman Coelho, now with that introduction, I really would like to know the story behind what you did to essentially make sure that Sousa Mendes, after so many years of living in anonymity, was finally brought to the world via your efforts in working with President Mario Soares and the Foreign Minister Cavaco Silva. It's a wonderful story and people need to know of it.
Thank you, Robert. Appreciate it very much and happy to participate in this program and particularly to have the two granddaughters part of this show. I was contacted by Congressman George Miller of Northern California, who said that Congressman Pete Stark and he had been trying to get the Portuguese government to change their position, and they had been unsuccessful. So I, of course, in my role, knew the Portuguese officials quite well. And I first went to the Prime Minister, Cavaco de Silva, and he basically said it couldn't be done because the foreign ministry was in charge of this, and they felt very strongly about it. Well, being a good Portuguese person, I never give up. So I decided to go to the president, Mario Soares, who was a close personal friend. And I explained to him what was going on. I felt very strongly that if we had someone in the Portuguese ministry who saved thousands of Jewish lives, why wouldn't we be honored? And he said, let me check. He got back and he said the foreign ministry is strongly opposed. It would be an insult if they were to change. And I then basically told President Soares that I would not give up on this. I felt that it was the right thing to do. And I sort of indicated to them in a very polite, firm way that as one who was a big supporter of Portugal and foreign aid and so forth, that I would have problems with supporting the land of my people if they didn't do the right thing on this. And so after a lot of discussion, he came back to me and said, we agree. We've talked to the foreign ministry. They have agreed to turn it around. And the story on Sousa Mendes is a wonderful story as an individual who everything was taken away from him, all of his personal ownings. He died as a pauper in a robe that was handed down to him, and was disgraced, and the whole family was disgraced in Portugal because he was a so-called traitor. So turning this around was the right thing, the very right thing. It saved thousands of Jewish lives, and we should be recognizing people like him. And I'm proud of the Portuguese government for turning that around and honoring him. And today, he is one of the most revered former Portuguese individuals because of what he did. And I think that's the right thing.
Right. Now, one of the things that I'd like to share with some of the audience, or maybe all of the audience, is some of the history, contemporary history of Portugal. Mario Soares was jailed 12 times and was in exile twice during the 60-year reign of the fascist governments, regimes that were in place. And what was happening in the Foreign Service was individuals in the Foreign Service inherited those positions. It was a closed society. Sousa Mendes was from an aristocratic family, and he did not care because he was a devout Christian, a practicing Catholic, and he understood that the Constitution of Portugal did not discriminate against individuals relative to their political orientation, to their religion, and national origin. So he was true as a lawyer, a graduate of the oldest university in Portugal, and along with his brother, his twin brother, who also was the ambassador to Warsaw. And so he really stood his ground and understood that there could be consequences, but he was above, again, the issues that were confronting him. For 60 years, the successors of Salazar reigned Portugal with an iron glove. So again, and the part was you in what you did, people don't realize that you as the whip had a significant role. One is because Portugal then was a poor country. It was in financial let's call it disrepair, all right? And Cavaco Silva, along with another one of his, deputies, came on an annual basis for their handout, their allocation of foreign aid, all right? And Mario Suarez was not their candidate because they represented the former regime, the status quo ante, all right? And Mario, if I understand correctly, even though he's president, he didn't necessarily have the power to do what he wanted to do.
That's
all right? It was like hitting a brick wall. You, in your brilliance and understanding that as a proud Portuguese diplomat yourself, provided the wedge for Mario Suarez to then use you as the excuse of why they had to rehabilitate Sousa Mendes, all right? And that was part of what you did, in loosening that process and began the whole, what for us right now is the continuing worldwide recognition of who Sousa Mendes was, continues to be when it comes to human rights and immigrants.
I think that the thing to totally understand is that the foreign ministry was extremely powerful during those days. And Mario had just been elected president. And he, of course, wanted to make some changes. He also didn't want to make enemies. And so he was very careful on what he did. But as the highest ranking Portuguese American in the country at the time, the first ever elected, but the highest ranking Portuguese American ever, Mario understood that to have me be upset and opposed and so forth was not a smart thing. And so he is the one that then took on the foreign ministry. They were not pleased at all, but he took on the foreign ministry and used me as a wedge to get it done. But he was smart in the way he did it.
Right. And I have to share with you that Olivia and all of us know through the foundation, there's a whole new generation of diplomats in the foreign service. Right. And Sousa Mendes is their role model of morality and standing up for what's right. And we're so pleased to have this new generation of enlightened men and women who understood what their country had gone through and work every day to ensure that Portugal remains a democracy.
I just want to say one thing, Robert. I think that everybody should understand, I mentioned it briefly, that he was a very prominent foreign minister and was widely respected in the Portuguese foreign ministry. And when he, in effect, signed the papers for people to go to Portugal, that he was, in effect, going against the Portuguese government. And he knew what he did. And he consequently, as a result of that, was punished. He lost everything. He lost his home. He lost everything that he had. And they tried to disgrace him. And he died as a pauper. And he died only with a robe that was given to him by somebody else. That's the way he was buried.
Right. It was a hand-me-down. It was a hand-me-down.
And so I think people need to understand just how defamed he was because he did the right thing. But now it's great that he is now honored in the way that he should have been honored then, but he's now honored, and that's a great thing. And I'm proud of the Portuguese government for turning it around.
Right, and so are we. And just for people's information, if they want to Google it, he disobeyed Circular 14 that Salazar had ordered, essentially letting the Foreign Service understand that they were not allowed to issue visas to undesirable individuals and stateless individuals. The Jews were both undesirable and stateless, as well as other political adversaries of the Salazar regime, even though it feigned being neutral, was sympathetic to the Axis. And so again, Circular 14 was what Sousa Mendes responded to. And thank goodness he was a man of moral courage and again, exemplified the altruistic personality because he had nothing to gain and everything to lose by helping the disadvantaged, the disenfranchised of the world. And the Sousa Mendes Foundation, I don't think it was explained, is very unique because it's the one foundation that is founded by the descendants of the righteous, of the diplomat, and those who received the visas and their progeny, their children and grandchildren. And so we're very proud of who we are, exemplified by Gigi and Sheila, who have been active on our behalf and have been active on behalf of their family in different parts of the world. And we really thank you again, Tony, for everything you've done.
Thank you, Robert. I would just say one thing, just to make sure people understand. If it hadn't been for Sheila and Gigi's family, this would have never happened. They fought hard and were turned down by members of Congress. They were turned down by others, but they were determined and they fought hard. And when I met with them, it was very emotional that they really wanted to get this done, and they were struggling to get it done. So I applaud them, the family, for what they did to make this happen. And I was just sort of a pawn in the process to get it done. But if it weren't
You
for
were
the
not
family,
a pawn by any means. You're
But
not a
the-
pawn at all. You're your
Pawn
own
did it.
man, and you let them know what you felt as a
Yes.
proud Portuguese American.
absolutely.
That's good. Now hang around with us because I want you to be more of the conversation. But I want to introduce, I have two wonderful people who have been my friends for many years. I'm going to begin with Gigi Muetzel. Well, Gigi, and then I'm going to speak to Sheila Abranches-Pierce. Each one of you have total different last names. So Gigi, tell everybody what your real first name is, or your entire name.
Well, my entire Portuguese name is Angelina Maria Jesus de Sousa Mendes do Amaral e Abranches and Muetzel. And it's also Gigi because I was named after my grandmother, Angelina, who was Gigi. And apparently I am the only granddaughter of many that it has been named after her. And so that's quite a privilege and some big shoes to fill.
Right. Now, a lot of us in the audience, being Jewish, will not know that your middle name is, again, Angelina Maria Mary of Jesus, because you were from a very religious Catholic family.
Yes,
right?
indeed.
Your father and all of your family members have always been proud, and they never second thought that what your grandfather did was wrong. They all supported it proudly to these days, and a number of your uncles and aunts passed on without ever realizing the beauty of your grandfather and grandmother, Angelina, being recognized for what they did. Now, Sheila, tell me, where did the branches come from in all of those names? What is your real name? Your real name?
My legal name is Sheila Abranches-Pierce. I won't give you the middle names and all of that stuff, but
okay, we already know some of that. Okay.
Yeah, my father chose Abranches. He was number 13 of 14 children between our grandparents. My grandfather had one other child with his second marriage, so he had 15. But my father, when he came to the States, was told he could only have 3 names: your first name, your middle name, your last name. His first name is John Paul. They consider that 2 names. He considers it 1 name. The family most common name used in Europe is de Sousa Mendes. That's also 2 names, but he was adamant, you cannot separate that name. So he decided to go with Abranches. Abranches is the oldest name in the family tree. It goes back to the first kings of Portugal, and we were always told that we had an ancestor who fought in battle with it was either a prince or a king in Normandy, and the battle went well and he saved his life and he was awarded the knighthood of Ranch. So that's how the family came to that name. So he chose Abranches so he could keep John Paul, but he would often tell us kids, you know, I picked Abranches because I wanted to get paid first. I would be top of the payroll. So he had like a fun little sense of humor about his time.
Your father always had a wonderful sense of humor.
Yeah.
He was a wonderful man.
Being the youngest of 14 kids gives you a lot of benefits.
And what number was your dad, Gigi? What number was your dad?
My father was the 11th child.
11.
Yeah.
So they were close together.
Yes,
As
very
your father
close.
would say, Sheila, he was the caboose.
Yes,
right?
he was. He was. He was.
Yeah.
At front.
That's great. So let's go see some of the slideshow that we have, the PowerPoint.
You're gonna go.
Okay, here we have the Sousa Mendes family in 1938, and it's a very happy picture that little did they know what was to occur in the future. But my father is the first one on the left, and then that's Carlos Francisco Fernando, and then my Uncle Manuel, and so on. My grandmother sits there, Angelina, and my grandfather with a big smile, which was an unusual photograph because most of the Sousa Mendes, you hardly ever saw them smiling.
Look at the rest of them.
So that's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And-
it's-
Just to say quickly, you know, the kids were all classically trained, so it's not surprising there's a piano that they're sitting around. They would have concerts in the house for entertainment along with their cousins, and yeah, so it's
That's
nice.
how they
Yeah.
ended.
and then, you know, people who have seen the movie will know, and in some of the opening scene, your grandfather is the conductor of the orchestra. It's
Yeah.
made in place orchestra.
Yes.
That's great.
Yes.
Good. Next slide.
Okay, so this is the slide many people are familiar with, but if you are not familiar with the story, this is my grandfather with the Rabbi Kruger, and it was through their many conversations that my grandfather was inspired to issue visas for everybody. You know, originally he had told the rabbi, I can issue visas for you and your family. But at this time, there were a lot of refugees already gathering outside his apartment, which was also his office. And so the Rabbi Kruger had instructed him, I can't possibly accept these visas if the rest of my family, meaning the other refugees, are not able to have visas. And so it was with those types of exchanges that my grandparents went into seclusion for 3 days in prayer. And it is while they were in prayer that my grandfather told his children, our fathers, that he had heard a voice, and the voice had said to him, you know, you have to issue visas to everybody and don't worry about it, just issue the visas. And with that, when he came out of that 3-day prayer behind closed doors, his hair went completely white. So it was a decision that they did not take lightly. And then here to the left, you'll see this is a copy of one of the original visas from the June series, and that is his original signature there. There was an assembly line, so there are some visas out there that may have been signed by my Uncle Pedro Nuno, who learned how to sign his signature for reasons most teenagers do sign their parents' names. But so
For report cards, right?
yeah. I mean, you know, that's how I guess some things don't change, you know, but
that was how they were
Right.
able to
move these
issue
along.
that
Right.
many visas.
Right.
Right.
And I just want people to note, you have an Orthodox rabbi next to a gentleman who was a devout Catholic coming
Yes.
together for morality,
Yes.
which
Right.
is most important.
And not to let it be lost, both were family men, both loved their children. They could not stand by and see somebody else with their children not
Being
have the
destroyed,
same
yeah.
possibilities. It's just not possible, you know, so.
Thank you. Next, please.
Now here we have the brothers in uniform for the United States. Carlos, 1943, was my father, and he served in Paris as a translator at that time. And my uncle Sebastian, who we will see perhaps in the next clip, he also was enlisted in the American Army. And they were able to do that because both of them, my uncle Sebastian and my father, they were born in the United States.
In
while-
Berkeley, right?
in Berkeley, California, while my grandfather was serving in San Francisco office.
Mhm. Yep. And then you have my father, as Robert mentioned, the runt or the caboose. I
Oh,
mentioned.
I
he
didn't
was
say
the-
that. I said he
I
was
said
the
he was the
caboose.
runt because he
Well, your
was
father
very
used to
small.
say that jokingly, but
he
I
was
never
very
wanted
short.
to hear that.
Yeah, and as my uncle Carlos was very tall. So anyway, so 10 years later, my father was able to immigrate to the United States, and he always felt he had to. You know, being one of the younger children, he could not get an education in Portugal. He would go to class, and the teacher would literally ask him, "Are you the son of Caesar or Aristides?" And he'd say, "Aristides." And the teacher would say, "Don't even bother taking the test. I'm going to fail you. You can leave now." So there, many of the younger children did leave Portugal, and they did come to North America. They went to Canada, various parts of the United States. And so anyway, my father was there stationed in Anchorage. Yeah, in Anchorage. Yeah, so thank
And
you.
when he migrated to the United States, I know that he was in a boarding house in San Francisco where he
Yes.
met your mother, Johanna.
Yes, Johanna, also from
Johanna
immigrants.
Casey, right?
Yes, Johanna Casey, immigrants from Ireland, and many stories of those glory days of being young and in San Francisco with people from all around the world. They
Right.
were, yeah, it was a good time, good story. So
Good.
it was nice for him. Yeah.
Thank
The
you.
next-
Next, please.
Do you want to take? So here, all of the children of our grandfather passionately supported the decision of their parents. And my Aunt Joanna is there in the middle, solid dress. And she was one of the first who had started letter writing campaigns. And this is a ceremony where Yad Vashem had honored their father as a righteous Gentile. I might be getting the medals wrong, but
No,
in
you're
essence,
right. He was
okay.
righteous among the nations. Right,
Right.
right. And then it
So,
was called that.
This was, years, 67. This is like 20 years, right, after the events. And so it just takes time. But in any case, they were very happy, very pleased, although you just see little smiles on them. But it was a very big start. So here to the far left is my uncle Sebastian, who is the American. Go ahead.
Right, and he was in the service in Normandy during the Second World War.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, he was. And then in front of him is my younger cousin, Aristides. We call him Titinho or Stephen. Then we have my Aunt Trezinga there in the back. I believe she was born in Brazil. She's one of the Brazilians. And then her two girls, Geraldine and Carolyn. And then behind Carolyn there is my Uncle Caesar. He was one of the young fellows helping out my grandfather during that assembly line. You have my Aunt Joanna. And then my Uncle Louis Philippe, who was number 11. And then, oh wait, no, he was number 13.
Right, and he was sent to Canada,
Anyway,
right?
it doesn't matter. He's the one who was
Right.
before my father. My father's 13, so I can't do math. But then there's my father looking right at the camera, breathtakingly.
Great, thank you. Next.
So in the early 80s, one of the ideas being bounced around was to have a petition. My mother had suggested to my father that this was the American way. You start a petition, you collect support, and then you take it to the local government, or in this case to Congress. This was an initiative that they started at their local parish in Dublin, California, which they were a part of for 40 years. So they were collecting signatures from all over, and that's my father there in the blue jacket in the far left. So, and a copy of one of the signature pages. So, next.
Great, next.
You
And here is the Abranches family with Congressman Tony Coelho himself.
Now, Tony, you were there. I have evidence. Tell, where did this take place?
This was in Los Angeles, and it was my explaining what I did and why. And I was majority whip at the time. And it was a serious but joyful ceremony. And so I was happy to be there.
Right, and that was, again, I believe at the Simon Wiesenthal Center, the museum. where their grandfather was given the Courage to Care Award from again, from B'nai B'rith. And there's John Paul, his wife, Joan, and Carlos, Gigi's brother, is right behind John Paul. I'm sorry you can't see him fully. Peter is the tall gentleman on the far left. And then there's Eileen and Paul Abranches, Sheila's siblings, and of
Right.
course, Congressman.
Right, and I just want to call out too that during these days, as Tony had mentioned before, that the family had constantly been pushing. It wasn't just those born of my grandparents. You know, my mother was a very strong supporter of all of these activities, and she would coordinate the meetings for my father. She would type out everything. She would send out letters. She would proofread his speeches. And this was all before the computer. This was just with manual typewriters and Xerox machines and whiteouts and yellowouts and all of those things. And so it was very consuming for the family. It was definitely a family effort, and not just a family effort, but as they say, you know, it takes a village. It took a global village to keep this story moving forward. So
Yeah, and, part of the story is I had been managing the Jewish Community Relations Council of the Greater East Bay in Oakland, California. And my responsibility was to do the annual memorial for Yom HaShoah. I read an article of your father, Sheila, being interviewed in the Oakland Tribune on Monday, March the 17th in 1986. You know, essentially being interviewed saying that his father had rescued Jews during the Holocaust, and I never knew about it. I had studied the Holocaust. I had known about all those that were, you know, who were identified as saving Jews and others. Never heard of Sousa Mendes. I spoke to a gentleman named Mordechai Paldil, who at that time was the director for the documentation of the righteous among the nations, to be designated such. And it's through him shared with me that Sousa Mendes, in his opinion, and other Jewish historians, was that he had essentially saved the greatest number of individuals than others because he did it by himself, literally, with the family, and that it was not premeditated. He saw the issue and he performed. And thank goodness Mordechai is now on our board, and has done some wonderful things in continuing the recognition of Sousa Mendes. And so Joan and John Paul, his name was Jean Paul in Portuguese, he anglicized the name, along with a woman, Ann Tressiter, and again, along with me, the four of us started on paper what was called the International Committee for the Commemoration of Dr. Aristides de Sousa Mendes. The Sousa Mendes family has this most magnificent family crest that we had a friend in Jerusalem who had a friend at a boys' printing school in Jerusalem. They made this stationery. It was in 3 languages. It was in English, Hebrew, and Portuguese. And then we had the family crest screen on the back, and family members from all over the world became our offices. And the international office, our office was in my office in Oakland, California. John Paul was the president, Joan was the secretary, and I sometimes was executive director if they needed me to be listed. But we created this whole activity. And again, when I was looking for somebody to champion our cause, I looked high and low for individuals who could help us. There was a national organization called PALC USA, Portuguese American Leadership Conference USA, and they were in some disarray. And again, it was Tony Coelho who brought it up. And again, if it wasn't for him, we would not be where we are today. So that is part of the story. And you know that, Sheila, because your dad told you about it. Your dad, Gigi, he would show up at, he'd show up maybe in Salinas. He came to Oakland, when your dad, Sheila, called your dad, he got on a bus from LA, and he showed up to be there with his brother, with his kid brother. It was greatly appreciated. Okay, I think I've said it. What's the next? What's the next PowerPoint?
We'll go fast.
We're doing okay.
We'll go fast. Okay, so the next we have following this was one of the outcomes of all of these activities and these events was that my grandfather was awarded one of the highest medals in the Portuguese government. And here you'll see the sash. Over to the right, lower right, you'll see like the medallion. And then on the upper left of that frame, you'll see what you would wear on your lapel. This was all post-mortemly, obviously, because my grandfather passed away in, I believe, in the 50s. But this was a really big deal because the children that were still alive got to see their father recognized and reinstated back into the history books of Portugal. So it was a very big deal.
Right,
So,
and that is called the Order of Christ First Degree. Right, again, it's the highest civilian award that can be given to somebody who is not in the military.
That's correct.
Right. And then he's also been reinstated in the Consular Corps.
Yeah.
And other accolades have been bestowed upon him. And we can talk about that more if we have time, but tell me who this happy family is.
So this is also part of that whole event that was related to that previous slide. This was a big ceremony in Washington, D.C. This was when President Schwarz came out and publicly apologized to the family. It was a kind of a semi-private ceremony, but still it was a very, very big deal. He apologized for all the pain and suffering, all of the hurt caused, as well as he apologized to the Portuguese Jewish community for their part of the Inquisition. And that was the first time we had ever heard a public official from Portugal apologizing.
Right, he was a different kind of politician than from before. And his wife, Maria Barroso, also took up educating the school children in Portugal about Sousa Mendes and having, again, curricula instituted within the teaching system.
Right. So in here, you'll see some of most of these family members are from the North American contingent. We did have 2 cousins from Europe show up, and that was great that they were able to make it. But you'll see there in the back is my Uncle Louis Philippe, and then my Uncle Carlos, my Aunt Joanna, and my Uncle Caesar. And I believe my dad is taking the picture because he's missing. So it was a joyous time for sure. So next. Okay, you can take that.
And here we find Johan Claes, John Paul Abranches, Carlos Mendes, my father, with a big smile, which is nice too. Consul General Jacob Sela and Robert Jacobvitz, our family friend, who has been pivotal in this whole action.
Well, not chocolate.
But if I can ask Robert to give us a little bit more background on Johan.
Sure, let me tell you this. This took place in Oakland City Hall, again in 1987. Jacob Sela played a pivotal role that most people do not know. This was before we had email, or we used fax machines that the copy would disappear within a week. He allowed me to send messages to the Israeli ambassador to Portugal, a woman who then became a member of the Knesset. And so Jacob was really very, very instrumental in that. And the gentleman on the far end is Johan Claes, who was a member of the California State Assembly. And what we have here, again, Carlos was there with his kid brother. And what we have is again, Jacob. Essentially, this is the honorary memorial citizenship your grandfather received in Israel. And Johan is, along with your dad, Sheila, has a copy of one of the many bills that a Portuguese Jewish coalition up through the legislature in Sacramento had passed on behalf, again, of your grandfather's efforts. And the woman who was the ambassador's name was Colette Avital. She was the first woman ambassador from Israel to again, and her first station was in Lisbon. And I would work with her through the diplomatic messages and getting back and forth while we, as an NGO, non-government organization, did what we could on the outside. And she represented Israel because, as we all know, Israel in part was founded by those displaced persons and Holocaust survivors. So Israel had a very important and very serious role in ensuring that Sousa Mendes was recognized. And we're forever grateful for the Israeli government in helping us do what we needed to do, because we could not have done it any other way relative to the communication process.
Yeah,
Next.
thank you.
Here's a quick photo of my parents as they retired in their golden years in a local winery in California. Very pleased, and as I've said before to different people, it's just an honor to see someone have a life purpose and to watch people support that person achieve their goal. Now, my grandfather had a life purpose and his son had a life purpose, as well as all his sons and daughters. But for me as a granddaughter, I'm going to talk about my father achieving his goal and watching him achieve his goal with my mother and with others like Tony and Robert and many others during those days. There were many people who helped. It truly took a village. But then quickly over here, we have just a candid shot of my dad talking with the president. Again, it was just a very satisfying time to have the family acknowledged, have the pain acknowledged, have the deeds and the courage acknowledged, so thank you.
Right, and there's just one commentary is that when I read the article of John Paul with, again, the reporter was a fellow named Roland de Wolk, and he himself was a child of Dutch survivors. And so I called Roland. I said, I've never heard of this Sousa Mendes guy. Is this guy the MS? Is it the truth? He says, absolutely. And Jean Paul's got the documents to do that. With that, I brought the story to our board, the Jewish Community Relations Council in Oakland. And essentially I said, this family, they are victims of the Holocaust. They are invisible because they have no constituency. Because the Portuguese community, for the most part, was disinterested. Many of them were from the islands that had really not much of an understanding or contact with the Second World War, and the church was totally disinterested and would not really help at all, which was really disappointing for especially John Paul and Joan because they were such devout Catholics. I said to the board, we have an obligation as Jews to help these people because they are invisible victims of the Holocaust. And for me, it was that if my great-grandparents had not emigrated from Russia after the Russo-Japanese War, by accident of fate, my grandparents or parents could have been at his doorpost, pleading for a visa. And I had an obligation to help this family and help his memory to come back into reality. So that was my investment in making sure that we did justice for the Sousa Mendes family.
Thank you.
Absolutely. What do we have next, ladies?
So here just we have a couple of slides that are just illustrating some of the memorials that have been in his honor. They're worldwide, literally. They're in forms of streets, schools, parks, statues, awards, ceremonies,
Movies,
music. So it runs the gamut. And this is all because of folks champion the family and helping them out. So here we have a park in Montreal. This was one of the earlier events. I believe this took place in the 80s. And then to the right, we have one of the most recent events that took place in Jerusalem. And as I understand, the inauguration of this one hasn't yet been scheduled because of COVID.
Because of the pandemic, we had to put that on hold. but this square is again right in Jerusalem, and at least the sign is up now. And we hope to again take a delegation or to be present when they finally dedicate this park. And again, it was the city hall, the mayor of Montreal. I was there with John Paul at least twice, along with your cousins, Gerald and Louis Philippe, and maybe Linda as well, when that was dedicated in Montreal, the Sousa Mendes Park.
Yep. And their kids, I'm sure, were there. And then the next slide is of the house. This is the house the family would go home to. The family would come here in the summertime, and it is here that during the summer I heard growing up that they would open their home up as a soup kitchen for the local families who needed help. So that spirit of community and service was always one that was part of the family thread. It was one that their children grew up with, our fathers grew up with. So it's a great reminder, and that house is in the process of being restored. Now, also, one of the celebrations in honor of my grandfather and really both my grandparents is a Journey to Freedom event. We've had a few. The first one was just the cousins. And then once this foundation was put together, we had it broadened out to, the invitation was opened. And the one I took was pretty much full of children of visa recipients, with 1 or 2 visa recipients, and grandchildren. So it was a wonderful mix. I know since then they've had educators and things like that, but the Sousa Mendes Foundation, the American Foundation, has this trip planned. And I believe there's another trip currently being planned for 2022.
Right, and right on the screen is the map of the actual journey.
The tour. Yep, the tour follows the path of the refugees. And so some of the refugees received their visas in Bordeaux, some in Bayonne and Hondé, because my grandfather was responsible for that whole region, not just Bordeaux. And there are stories of a group of visa recipients that had to go through a border crossing in Spain that was not heavily up to
They didn't have a telephone.
Right.
So your grandfather said, "They're with me," and showed the visas, and they walked
and they got through. But through these events, I was able to meet the grandson of one of those children who passed through that border crossing. And that was Svi Deutsch's son, Nathaniel. And I have to say, it was amazing to meet my counterpart of that coin, and moving to know that story was not just hearsay. It was a fact. He grew up with the story from the other side. His father told stories about how they had to escape through that border crossing.
Right, and Svi Deutsch was an educator in Milwaukee, and he wrote a number of articles. About that. Again, I was one of the co-tour leaders in, again, 2019, where we again had visa recipients, and now we even have their grandchildren coming with them. We have Jewish educators, Holocaust educators, as well as we had 2 priests and a rabbi. And we visited the family home. We say Kaddish in front of the tomb, and then we meet, people from all over Portugal. And even at one of the hotels, one of the clerk, I said, "You ever hear of Sousa Mendes?" And he said, "Of course, they teach it in school." So,
I just wanted to add one more thing. So, as we said, this is a global village, and I have to say truly that the Sousa Mendes Foundation has taken it to the next level, because they've gone and identified actual visa recipients and children of the visa recipients and have created a community. So maybe some of you here are part of that community, and maybe some of you are just interested in the story, but it does continue to grow. So I just wanted to say my thank you. And I don't know.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Gigi. And everybody just go to this, SousaMendesFoundation.org, and you'll see how wide and deep it is. We have a couple thousand, maybe 3 or more thousand individuals listed as visa recipients, and photos and other artifacts there. But I expect that Olivia has something to say because we may have some questions from the audience, I hope. Olivia?
Okay, so thank you. I'm going to take the floor back now. I see there are a lot of questions in the chat box. We will get to them in a minute. Right now, I do want to tell you about the couple of upcoming programs. We've been running these programs every Sunday for more than a year now. We run them in 10-week blocks. So we're almost to the end of our spring series, our second 10-week block, which will end on June 13th. So next week, we're doing a program co-presented with the International Center for the Study, Treatment, and Prevention of Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma, directed by the renowned psychologist, Dr. Yael Danieli. And Dr. Danieli came to us with the idea of having Ben Ferencz, the prosecutor at Nuremberg, as part of this series. And I was just, obviously, how could I say no to such a wonderful offer? So next week's program is a free program. We have pre-recorded the interview that Dr. Danieli did with Mr. Ferencz. We had a planning meeting back in April with Mr. Ferencz to talk about next week's program. And he says, "What do you mean a planning meeting? I'm 102, I'm wearing a tie, press record." So we pressed record, we did record that interview, and he has a lot to teach us. So there's a fabulous film we're gonna have you see called Law, Not War. And then Dr. Danieli will be with us to introduce the interview and to answer questions. So please sign up for that. Again, that is a free program. The following week, we will be presenting Sousa Mendes as part of other diplomat rescuers. We're showing a really glorious film called The Rescuers by Michael King. And what he did, Michael King, was to compare the rescuers, the diplomat rescuers of the Holocaust, to the situation in more recent genocides. And the film is co-narrated by Sir Martin Gilbert, the Holocaust authority, and a young Rwandan anti-genocide activist. So we're just going to play for you the trailer and hope that you will sign up for that program as well.
Kigali has been the center of the fiercest fighting in the Civil War. The United Nations has been able to do very little to help these people.
As a Rwandan and an anti-genocide activist who lost many members of my family to genocide, I could not think of a better project to be part of than one that shows how all of us can make a difference.
My father was a young diplomat in 1943. My father was told to stop giving these passports and helping the Jewish community escape the island.
German planes.
My mother was thrown to the ground and she died the following Saturday.
Jacobvitz, a member of the Nazi Party, had by his efforts organized the rescue of 7,200 people. An amazing feat of goodness from someone who had been trained in the art of evil.
I feel so peculiar standing here with you because you're alive.
It is terrible that so many people had to die, where 600,000 Jews lived before, and at the end of the war, 90,000 has left to live.
You don't connect these bureaucratic actions to the actual saving of a life.
Yeah, not when you see you, though.
What would you say to Frank Foley today if you met him?
Thank you for saving our lives. Thank you.
When you reflect on the diplomats, the phrase, the mystery of goodness, is it a mystery, or do you think goodness is actually a deep-seated human virtue which emerges?
I know there can be hope. I've learned that when we see crimes against humanity, we cannot turn the other way. Instead, we must transform our fears into courage to take action.
So after today's program, you will receive an email about these 2 programs to come. Next week is free, as I mentioned. The one on June 13th, The Rescuer, there is, tickets are required, but tickets are by donation of any amount. We do suggest the number 18 or high. But if you're able to give more, that's wonderful. If it's a hardship for you, then any amount is fine. And all donations to the foundation are tax deductible. So now let's turn to your questions. And I think this one might be for the Congressman. And the question is, how did the Portuguese Ministry of Foreign Affairs initially articulate their objections to having Sousa Mendes rehabilitated?
It was very simple. They said that he violated the decision of the Portuguese government. And in truth, that's the facts. He did. And he did it because he thought the Portuguese government was wrong. And he proceeded to go ahead and sign the visas so that people could leave. So that's the issue. And when I first got involved, Cavaco Silva basically said the Portuguese Foreign Ministry does not support any changes because he was a traitor to our government. And then it took Mario Suarez to turn that around. So that's the answer.
And Sheila and Gigi, I believe this question is for you, and that is, did your grandfather have any regrets either of what he was not able to do or what he in fact did do?
Our grandfather never had any regrets as to what he did. In fact, as I just would like to go back for a moment to what Robert was saying about him being part of the Holocaust and a refugee himself, because I recall that when he was stripped of all his titles and the family fell into poverty, he went into a soup kitchen in Lisbon. And as he approached the soup kitchen, or rather went in it, and they told him, they said, "Sir," because of the way he presented himself and the family spoke fluently. And he said, they said, "This is for," they told him, "Sir, the dining room is upstairs. This is for refugees only." And my grandfather answered, "Eu também sou refugiados," which means we are also refugees. So he was part of the Holocaust himself. And also, one of my favorite quotes of his, he never regretted what he did because he said, "I'd rather be with God against man than with men against God."
Right. And he had relayed his story to the young fellow in the soup kitchen serving the family. And he had told him, if so many people can suffer for one man, then one man can suffer for so many people. And I welcome the opportunity with love. That's what we were raised with. That's there were no regrets. And as Tony had mentioned, that the entire family was, as far as I know, was behind him. I mean, I never heard otherwise. You know, they dedicated their lives to supporting this choice of both my grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's what impressed me as a member of Congress. I get lots of appeals, and a lot of people have very legitimate stories, but I was very impressed with the attitude of the family and how determined they were to make sure that there was a correction. Now, if you had been presented the story from the beginning, you would understand that the Portuguese government said that he was not, Sousa Mendes was not a legitimate foreign minister, that he violated the laws, and that we could not recognize him. So you can see the conflict that was going on, and to some extent it was legit. And then, of course, on the other side, Sousa Mendes did exactly the right thing, and that was to violate the Portuguese law.
So it's time now to turn to the final thoughts of our speakers, starting with Sheila and Gigi.
Well, on behalf of our family, we of course would so grateful to Tony Coelho for all of his efforts, everything he did for our grandfather, and he wouldn't be at this point where he is if it weren't because of his efforts. as well as Robert. We dearly embrace you both for what you've done for our grandfather. And of course, the Sousa Mendes Foundation, Olivia, you know, we are so grateful for you spreading the word, spreading the history, because it wouldn't be so obvious to the rest of the world at this point if it weren't for all of you contributors.
It's like a baton. Everybody gets a piece of the race, you know? So it's hard to even just name 3 people, because there are many, like John Chrysostomo. There's just so many people who had a part in this relay race, and the family is very grateful.
Yes,
so thank you.
We love you guys.
Yes, thank you.
And Congressman, what would you like to say to our audience?
I think the only thing is I let you know that the Portuguese government gave me their highest honor because of what I did for Sousa Mendes. So I appreciated that, but it's really a thrill as a member of Congress, as an individual, to be able to correct a atrocity that occurred when he had to die in disgrace. But to turn that around is very much a pleasure for somebody like me to participate in that effort.
And I remember when I met you, Congressman, a few years ago, you were explaining that, of course, you were the author of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, and that you considered that great achievement and the rehabilitation recognition of Sousa Mendes to be basically 2 of your greatest achievements. I suppose you must still feel that way.
I still do. And I think the reason I do, you know, the ADA is not only the law of this land, but now is the law of the land of over 50 different countries. So I'm very honored that that has happened. But to be able to change the family history of an individual that was mistreated and died a pauper, and to turn that around so that he is now the legitimate hero that he should be, is very satisfying, very rewarding to somebody like me. And I should say, as a Portuguese American, it's more important that that happened.
And Robert, you and I work closely, so what would you like to say to our audience?
I very much appreciate being a part of this program and having a reunion with Congressman Coelho. Last time we were together was 5 years ago. And I'm always thankful when we're together. I wish it was more frequent. I hope he is interested in joining us on the next journey on the road to freedom with his family. We'd love to have you with us. There's a lot of people for you to meet and a lot of people to know who you are and what you did. And I always enjoy seeing Sheila and Gigi. I was adopted into their family along with my children. Yes. And so that has always been a very important thing of my life. And when I would go with John Paul on the many trips we went to visit the family would telegraph that John Paul's here and he's also coming with Robert. And there was no last name. And so I'm known in Portugal as Robert in any case. And again, thank you, Olivia, for your leadership. And again, if it was not for the Sousa Mendes Foundation and all of our supporters, we would not be where we are today. And again, Congressman, you were our hero and you continue to be our hero with what you were able to do for us. And it's greatly appreciated.
Only one thing I would say, Robert, I'm jealous. You're a member of the family, but I'm not.
Wow. Well, I'll bring it to the next board meeting. I'll bring it to the next family meeting, okay?
Thank you to our audience and to our speakers, to our moderator, and see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.